Hello, and welcome back to Conquering Finale. My name is Jason Lafredo, and once again, we are perfecting page layout. Today, we're talking about page and system scaling in Finale. Now, this has to do with how large or how small your music is relative to the size of the page. So this is a very important piece of getting the layout correct in your music. So I'm glad you joined me today. Now, with most things in the page layout tool, we have options for them in the page layout menu, but we also have default options in the page format window here for the score or the parts. So I'm actually going to start in the page format today, looking at the score since I'm viewing the score here, and we're going to start talking about scaling here first. Now, as we remember, this is the default settings, and whatever changes we make here are not going to affect the pages that already exist, because as we know, the pages have already been defined per these parameters. It's only new pages that will consult these parameters and get these new settings. So we're going to have to do the redefine pages thing, which I've showed you in previous videos. But anyway, we're here. We're going to take a look at this. So there is scaling options in the bottom left corner here for the page, and we have the scale page to percentage. And for the system, we have staff height and scale system percentage as well. Now, all three of these values will change the size of the music relative to the page. It's important to realize that that is the case, and it's sometimes important to understand why there's three different options to do that. First of all, when you scale the page, you have to understand that you're not only scaling the systems as well as the page, you're scaling everything else that's attached to the page, which is important because if you change this from 100%, if I go to 75% here, not only will the system then scale 75% and all the music within the system, but the text blocks will also get scaled to 75% because the text blocks are also attached to the page. If you make the changes to the system scaling instead of the page, then the text blocks will not change size. So that's it's important to realize that there's a difference there. In addition to text blocks, if you have graphics that are attached to a page, which I don't in this particular score, the graphics will also be affected by this scale page to percentage. So for this reason, I always prefer to leave the scale page percentage to 100%. And actually, let me just show you what happens. I'm going to put this at 75. Again, nothing happens until we do the redefine pages, right? All pages, yes. And I don't know if you saw it, everything gets smaller, 75% in fact, but the text blocks also get smaller. So you see my titles are now at 75%. If I just do a quick undo right here, just pay attention to the titles and they will go back to the larger size. There they are, as well as the systems and the music within the system. So that's sort of what's going on with that scaling page to percentage. So again, for me, I always like to keep this at 100% because frankly, if I'm putting titles, I want to know that a 24-point font is a 24-point font and not 75% of 24 point, for example. So for me, I always leave this at 100%, but you can change that if you want to. It's up to you. The other way we can change the size of the music relative to the page is actually through the system scaling. Now, when you scale the system, what you're scaling is everything within the confines of the system, again, ignoring everything outside of the confines of the system, which would include the text blocks that are attached to the page. So that's why it's a little bit better to do it here because it will leave the text blocks alone. So anything within the system, of course, that includes the staffs themselves, the staff lines, the staff height, the notes, the expressions, everything. This is all affected by the system scaling. And now there's two different ways to change the system scaling. There's the staff height, which is literally a measurement. If the page and the scale system is at 100%, the staff height will represent in inches when you print. So in this case, the distance between the bottom line of any given staff and the top line is going to be 0.18 inches in this case. So that's what's going on here. And then we could always just scale it as a percentage of that as well. Now you may be wondering, why is there two different things here? It's a good question. Really, changing either of these values will have the same effects, and we can just actually try that. So we're going to go 0.15% here. Click OK. Again, redefine. And you can see that it got smaller. Or we can change that back to 1.8 and put this at 75%. And again, redefine. And you see the same thing happen. So it's sort of two different ways to get to the same result. And what's interesting here is that there is a value here called resulting system scaling, 54%. And whenever we change either of these values, you will see the resulting system scaling change. So now it's at 40%. Go back to 100, it's at 54%. Go back to 0.15, it's at 45%. So you can kind of see that making either of those changes will do the same exact thing. For me, I prefer to use the staff height value here to set the size of the music instead of the scale system, particularly in the page format. The reason for this is that if for whatever reason, and there occasionally is a reason that I need to scale a specific system later on for a specific purpose, it's easier for me to think of percentages later on. So I want to keep this at 100% as the default, so that later on, if I need to make something 95% of what it is, and I just put 95% here instead of trying to calculate what 95% of 0.18 is, if that makes sense. So again, this is actually a personal choice. I choose to do it this way: set the staff height, leave the scale system percentage at 100 in the page format for score, and this will be how this is set up. Now, one thing of note here is that this resulting system scaling at 54%, it is somewhat arbitrary. I've discovered that a staff height of 0.33333, basically a third of an inch, will give you this resulting system scaling of 100%. I think it's kind of arbitrary. They just kind of chose that value, a third of an inch, as being the starting place for the resulting system scaling. So 100%, 100%, and a third of an inch gives you 100% resulting system scaling. Again, it's just, I think that's arbitrary, but anyway, so this is what we're doing. We're setting the system scaling here with the staff height or the percentage. And this, again, all three of these options will ultimately change the size of your score. So let's take a look at some of these options in the page layout menu for resize page and resize staff system. Let's start with the resize page, and we get this little mini window that's fairly easy to understand. We get that percentage for the resize page that you saw in the page format, and currently it's at 100%. We can change the page range of the current parts, selected parts, and score if we want. We've been through this in the last several lessons. This is all kind of works the same. You can change all the parts or all the parts and score. So there's a choice of scope here for this particular change. We can also change page 1 through the end of the piece, or just a single page by doing 1 through 1 or 2 through 2, or whatever it needs to be. You could do 1 through 7 if you want. So there's some options here to resize the page. And again, resizing the page resizes the text blocks as well. So be careful with that, because on this score I have text blocks on every single page. So that's what's going on. This option here at the bottom, update page format, this is sort of a mini version of basically this option here, update page format for score. We get this option a la carte within the resize page window here that we can check, and then any change that we make here will get reflected back in the page format. The kind of different thing about doing it here is that this will actually work for the score and the parts. So if I were in a part and I was updating or if I was resizing the page in a part and I had this checked, it would actually also change the page format for the parts as well, doing it that way. So slightly different, because this option here only changes the format for the score. And then one final option I want to talk about is this hold margin options. First of all, let me just show you what happens if I do this. I'm going to change 75% for page 1, current part or score, and you'll see that it changed to page 1 just like that, right? Makes kind of sense. Everything on the page gets scaled to 75%. Undo that, please. There we go. Going back here, this hold margins option is very strange to me. When you have this unchecked, it's not actually holding the margins. It's actually basically rescaling the page size as well, which I feel like this should actually say hold page size, not hold margins, because without this checked, if we go to 75%, watch what happens. I did that for the whole piece. But the page itself actually gets scaled to 75%, as well as the page scaling gets scaled to 75%. So now I don't know what size this page is. It's 8.5 by 14. It's 75% of 8.5 by 14. So I don't know, you'd have to find that particular paper. So, that option is suspect to me. Just always have that checked is really the best solution there. And then let's look at the resize staff system. Now, again, this is an override. We're overriding the page format, as we understand. So any change we make here will be just for the page, but it will not update the page format unless we have this option checked, which does the same thing that I just showed you in the resize page window. This will handily sort of take these changes and update the page format for you if you want. I'll talk about these other options in a second. But we have the similar options here as we do in the page format. We have options for the staff height and the resize staff system. Now, again, for me, I always think it's better to resize the system percentage in this window. If you're doing overrides, it's just easier to keep track of. And in fact, and also just I'll point out, we have the same scope options here for current, all parts, all score, select parts of score, etc., as well as the pages. So this all works the same way. And I kind of set this little concerto for E-flat scale specifically like this, because you will run into situations like this where your music may get very dense to the point where it may be impossible to actually space it at the percentage that you have it. Now, this page, I could probably make this work if I spent some time with the staff tool, moving these staffs apart. I would probably be fine here, but I'm going to show you what happens, how you can do this if this isn't the case, because I do run into this every so often where there's just too much material on the page to spread it out enough, and you actually have to change the percentage of the size of the system itself. And this is how you would kind of do this. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go into resize staff system, and I'm going to choose resize it to 92% here, just for system 2 through system 2. And again, I'm using the resize system percentage because it's easier to think the percentage of it as opposed to try and figure out what, 92% of 0.18 is. But anyway, we click OK, and it will rescale just that page. Now you notice that it actually will move the bottom margin up as well. So what we can do here in concert with that option is with the staff tool, and I showed you this in the last series of videos, we have this nice little tool for the respace staves, and we can use the percentage here, 110%, and this is going to respace the distance between the staves 110%. So not only am I shrinking the whole system with the page layout tool, I'm then expanding the space between using this respace staves. So watch what happens here. 110%, and it gets kind of, the bottoms and tops just about line up again. And if we zoom in, we can see that I've resolved a lot of those conflicts that had to do with this page just being too dense, and there's no more conflicts here. So that is sort of a quick way to do it. I personally would never go this far down to 92%. I just think the difference between the size is too noticeable. If I had more time, I would take some more time to spread these out manually, and then if it still wasn't enough to get rid of all the clashes, maybe 97-98% of the system scaling, it kind of doesn't register to the eye, but certainly 92% is enough to notice. So now there's two other options in this resize staff system window that I want to talk about here. Under the options, we've talked about update page format, the hold margins, and the resize vertical space options. Both of these are checked by default. I'm telling you right now, 100% of the time, leave these checked. I'm not even going to uncheck these and demonstrate what happens because it is so bizarre, and these options are so strange that they exist. But I'll tell you what they do. So with the hold margins checked, it will ensure that the margins of the system stay aligned with the margins of the page, which is what you always want. So why would you not, why would you uncheck that? With it unchecked, see if you can follow this. The margins will end up being the resulting system scaling. That's this number here, 54%. Percentage of the width of the page margins. It will not be the resize system scaling percentage value. Can you follow that? So if I were to change this to 90%, the resulting system scaling is 48%. And then all of a sudden, with this option unchecked, the total width of this system will now end up being 48% of the distance between the page margins. Again, I am way confused about that. I don't know why that exists like that. It actually took me a long time to figure out what exactly was going on. Again, 0% usefulness to have this unchecked. Similar thing with the resize vertical space option here. With this checked, the whole length of the system, that's the top margin to the bottom margin, will resize proportionally depending on what you choose here. So if you choose 90%, the margins themselves will shrink by 90%. 110% will expand to 110%. With this unchecked, this gets really strange again. It doesn't matter what you put here. The value or the height of the system will then revert to as if the resulting system scaling was 100%, which makes 0% sense to me. So again, I don't know why this would ever be an option to uncheck. It doesn't even seem to do what you would think it would. Resize vertical space to me sounds like it would resize the vertical space between the staffs. It doesn't do that whatsoever. It does something weird with the whole length of the system, and I can't even give you a rational argument for why these two options are available to uncheck. But they're there. You've listened to my spiel about it, and that's all there is to it. So, just leave these just leave them checked. Just leave them checked. Don't ever uncheck those options. All right, so that's page and system scaling. And one more thing I want to talk about just very briefly related to both of these things. I've never talked about the percentage tool in this series yet, but I'm going to switch over to it very quick. It's the thing that looks like a percentage. This is the tool that will actually allow you to click on most anything in Finale. Like if I click on this note here, I can actually resize the note head to whatever I want. It's a useful tool for a lot of things. But one thing that it can also do is it can invoke the size percentage tools from the page layout tool. So actually, if I choose this tool and click somewhere on the page outside of the system, you'll pull up that resize page window from the page layout tool. So that's actually kind of handy, and this works exactly the same. It's just a different way of getting here. We can also get the system scaling by clicking somewhere within the system that's not within a staff. So you definitely have to be careful and choose somewhere between the staffs. And that will pull up the resize staff system window that we just talked about. And this works exactly the same. It does the same thing. It's just from a different tool. Interestingly, if we click within the staff, this is where we would resize the staff itself. And I'll just show you this. We set to 75% for the flute staff here, and you can see that just the flute staff goes to 75% compared to the other staffs. Interestingly, that actually is the only way to resize the staffs. Within the staff tool, there's no menu option for resizing a given staff that you have selected or something. So interestingly, the percentage tool is the only way to resize the staff. But just to suffice it to say that just be careful about using it where you click will trigger a different type of resizing. And all of them are somewhat useful. So just a good thing to know. All right, so I think that covers it. That's page and system scaling in Finale. Like I said, this is a very important thing to get right when you're setting up your score, because you want that music to look good relative to the page size. So that's certainly important. All right, so once again, thanks for watching. The next video I'm going to do is on the systems themselves. We're going to start talking about the system margins and the spacing between the systems and all that stuff. So there's a lot to do with that. And so that'll be fun. So once again, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you soon on the next video.